Pienkowski, and we're here on another episode of Leadership Live. And I'm happy to be here today. We're going to talk about workforce views on accountability. How you doing today, Chris?
Great, JJ. How are you?
Man, if I were any better, I don't know. We had some computer issues, so it could have been better. But I'm happy that I have my coffee. We're gonna have good conversation. I can't really ask for too much more than that.
There you go. Make the best of the situation. That's what it's all about.
Yes, indeed. But that's all right. We're on a different platform. I hate when one platform starts going crazy and then you have to make a switch and play those games. But workforce views on accountability. So we've done a couple of calls here on accountability, or a couple live streams on accountability already. And it just seems like there's a trend, and that trend is that really you have to know the way to show the way. And I look back on our last episodes, and that's kind of a theme. So when it comes to workforce views on accountability, what do you think about that, Chris?
You're absolutely right. I mean, from a leadership standpoint, you do need to demonstrate what your standards of accountability are, because people have different definitions, and some of those definitions are driven by just pure personality, like this is just who I am. Other definitions are driven by past experience, and this is how I've seen things done in a certain workplace, and I really liked it, so I'm going to continue that. And you've got really a whole range of views of accountability, starting from the person who says, starting from no accountability, like I'm not being held accountable for anything. But when you get into the realm of some level of accountability, you've got the person who's like, I'm accountable for my stuff and no one else's, right? As long as I get my stuff done, then hey, you know what? I can kind of throw my hands up, even if the team as a whole is suffering. I know I got my stuff done. And that's a disruptive way of looking at accountability, when you're talking about a team environment. And then you have the whole opposite end of that spectrum, which is I'm at a senior level in the company and I am accountable for everything that happens throughout my chain of command. Good, bad, ugly, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you don't even have influence on those. Well, you do have influence on those frontline employees, but if one of them screws up, then you have to be looking at yourself and saying, what could I have done to prevent that? How can I take ownership of whatever that screw up was so that it doesn't happen again? But at the end of the day, the buck stops with me. So those are the two ranges of, two ends of the ranges of how people take accountability. Mine and no one else's, or I'm accountable for everything, even if it's not my direct action.
I will say there is something to be said about, that frontline employee who may not care about anybody else on the team, but they have that personal accountability to make sure they're getting the work done. There's something to be said about that person. They may not ever move up from their position, but to have somebody like that, they can be a valuable asset. Now, from a servant leadership perspective, which really is what makes a team or a company successful, if you can create a culture that way, it's really, really difficult. But there are a few companies that have successfully done that. That basically means that that's the second one that you said, where there's that holistic, every person is responsible for everything that happens in the company, and when something goes wrong, each person should be looking internally to see what they're doing that could be potentially causing harm, or what can they be doing to be making things better.
Yeah.
And there is a place for all types of leadership, but if you can create a culture with a bunch of people who think that second way, you're setting people up for success, not only where you're working, but you're setting them up for success at the next place, because you really hope that those people go to their next organization, rise up, and change the company culture there as well. I mean, it's just a ripple effect. It's not just where you are. Just
right.
like that frontline employee, right, that only cares about the work he's getting done. If you only care about the place that you work and then you go to the next place, the culture is different, and you just say, to hell with it. I'm just going to go with whatever the culture is here, and I'm not going to try to make anything better. Then, I think when you are raised in the right culture, that's not going to be the case at all.
No, you're right. But, back to something that you said at the very kind of beginning here is there are certain jobs and industries that where that frontline employee who's like, hey, man, I'm looking out for number one here. As long as I get my stuff done, I'm good. There are certain industries and companies that have that model, right? I'm thinking about like the service department of a car dealership.
Oh, yeah.
Right. You've got maybe a dozen mechanics working in your service bays. And when you've got that one mechanic who's just like, hey, I'm producing, and the mechanic 3 bays down from me is half as fast, maybe I care, from a level of like I do more than him, but
that's so true.
Yeah, but really at the end of the day, I care about getting my own stuff done. And you know what? That's where the leader of that service organization needs to be fine-tuned. And maybe he's talking to the person who's banging out 3 times as much work as the guy a few bays down, and he's learning from him. Hey, how are you so efficient? How are you doing this? He's not expecting that mechanic to be sharing his knowledge with others, but as a leader, he can pick his brain for that knowledge and share it with others, and maybe make the entire service bay more efficient. So you're right. There are jobs that lend themselves to that like singleton mindset. And okay, but now what can the immediate leader of that, learn from that person's mindset? And maybe he helps others to adopt, some bits and pieces of it as well.
That brings me back to my very last job before I started a business. I just want to share a quick story. So I was an area safety manager for a trucking company, and we had, oh gosh, what was it? About 12 sites. And, I bounced around and I checked on things at all those sites. And what was interesting is when I first started that job, those guys were so antsy when a safety guy would show up on site, because they immediately thought they would just straight up get in trouble. Well,
Right.
What I also noticed is that, as most truckers do, everyone was kind of in it for themselves. But what I also started to find is that when I would go and have these safety conversations, when I would see it wasn't a huge safety issue, it was just part of a company policy that if I noticed they were starting to slip a little bit, some of them were pretty stupid, to be honest with you, but you kind of got to roll with it when there's a policy in place. But when I would have these conversations, I noticed that there were a small handful, about maybe two or three guys per site, which I should say per rotation. There were like 3 or 4 sites per rotation on different on each shift. And they would say, I see this happen. I wish I could do something about it. But if I do something about it, my numbers will slip. And if my numbers will slip, I'll get written up. And so I noticed that within my first 30 days, to be honest with you. And as time went on, I started getting to know the operations managers at the different locations, and I started talking to them. That is exactly what the culture was. Even the operations managers were so afraid of improving the processes for everybody and then only focusing on each individual that they didn't see the opportunity to kind of unite the drivers and allow them to help one another.
Yeah.
And you know, there were senior drivers that really cared about how other people were doing, that just kept their mouth shut and, you know, just went behind the wheel of their own vehicle. I mean, some of the guys have been doing it for 25, 30 years. And so when, you know, I'm not going to toot my own horn. This was just the way the military thought. So I just naturally started making some of these shifts and having conversations. Well, why couldn't Joe Snuffy do this? Why couldn't Bob do this? Well, why couldn't they, you know, take a little bit of extra time? Don't you think that in the bigger scheme of things that it'll improve the overall processes of everybody if once in a while some of these people would jump out of their truck and slow down just a little bit to make sure that this other person is doing the right thing? And though my boss, he didn't like it at all, he wasn't there. So I allowed these things to happen, and I would stop people. And for my coaching sessions, what I would do instead of you know, knocking on them for the deficiencies, I would be talking about what they could be doing differently, what's actually causing these things. And they said, well, this guy helped me and this guy helped me, and I still don't understand. And so sometimes I would have to get behind the wheel myself, show them some things. And before you know it, this culture began developing where I would show up to do my observations, and there would be a truck pulled over on the side of the yard and a guy walking across, and they would be talking, and there would actually be ground guiding and stuff happening, and then conversations happening. And, you know, so what I'm really trying to say is that sometimes that selfishness at the ground level, that lack of caring, is actually not from the ground level employees themselves. That lack of accountability was from the managers. And that was a cultural lack of accountability. And the reason I bring this up is not to toot my own horn, not even one little bit. It's because if this is the type of culture that you have created in your organization, not you, Chris, not necessarily, because I know better. But I'm just saying, anyone who listens to this now or in the future, if this is something that you have created, if you are not allowing your people to cross-talk and help one another, and you have allowed that culture to develop where everybody is there for themselves, I mean, I don't really know how else to say this, but shame on you. You might not be necessarily doing anything wrong. You might be following company policy, but what you're really doing is you're creating a very selfish environment. It's kind of a toxic environment, one where if you don't allow these people to learn and grow and help one another, then the opportunities that are missed are so vast. And if you can't even hold, I mean, if you allow that revolving door to continue where you just fire when individuals don't do well, and you don't allow that cross coaching to happen at the bottom, then you're going to just struggle, and you're going to constantly be hiring and training and hiring and training and hiring and training, when really those opportunities could be there and you could retain employees just because you have people there who are willing to coach them through these problems, instead of sit back and say, oh, I saw that person screw up, and report the screw ups instead of just walking over and giving them a hand.
Yeah. Well, I've got a comment, and then I'll get into kind of a response to that. My comment is, I don't know if you planned this or not, but you were talking about your time at a trucking company, but not wanting to toot your own horn. I just thought that was funny.
Is that the point where I should be going like this?
Right.
Love it.
But the kind of the response to what you were saying is, I don't think that there's a single company on the face of this planet who has a policy against accountability. It may not be written, and it may not be part of someone's job description, but if you're a manager or you're a leader of any kind, and you think that part of your job is to not coach people and just wait for them to screw up to be written up, then you have no business whatsoever being in that role of leading others. That shouldn't be in your job description. You know, that should almost be a given. right? If you're leading others, it is your job to teach, coach, guide, provide constructive feedback or feed forward, like I like to say, to help them move forward. You don't wait for someone to totally screw up just so that you can write them up and they learn a lesson because they were written up. So your job, and that does create a toxic environment. Exactly what you said, because people see this right from the ground up. They see how you're operating, they see how you're managing people. And now it becomes an environment of CYA on the ground level. That kind of drives that individual accountability. Hey, I'm just looking out for me because, the boss is looking for me to screw up and write me up somehow. Then the trickle effect is now I don't raise my hand when I have a question. I'm not asking for, how can I do my job better? I'm not looking for development opportunities for myself, because it's been pretty clear through the actions of my boss that they're not looking to do that. They're just looking for the screw ups. And then the good people are going to leave. The old saying, people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses.
Yep.
So, but in a case like that, there are going to be some where a person slips through the cracks in the interview process, or maybe they started on the front line and they got promoted because they were always just looking out for themselves. They were accountable for themselves. That led to performance, right? And then it ripples upwards. They become a supervisor, manager, whatever. But there's probably that kind of level of accountability throughout that organization, or lack thereof, I should say. And it's just like Wild West. We're letting people figure it out. And when they get out of line, we're going to smack them back into line. Like that creates an entirely toxic culture.
Oh, it's horrible. And this is the last statement I'm going to make about how things were in that last company, but these guys, they had a specific way that they had to get in and out of their truck, and a specific way that they had to get back in their truck. And if they didn't follow it to a T, they got written up. If they got written up 3 times, they got fired. And it was, though I understand why they did it. I mean, they had a lot of, slips, trips, and falls for OSHA. I get all that stuff, right? But it was to the point where it was micromanaged. And when you micromanage and you don't allow people to, gosh, they should be allowed to make mistakes. Good Lord Almighty, how in the hell are they supposed to learn? Be quite honest with you. And they just weren't. But when you kind of allow them the opportunity to make mistakes, and you walk up to them and you have coaching conversations instead of, well, I'm writing this up as a mistake, and you'll probably have to talk to your operations manager, sort of thing. Well, then when it's a coaching conversation and you're helping them understand what went right, what went wrong, and what they can do differently, and then hear their feedback. Keywords, hear their feedback, and don't just let them talk. Hear their feedback. Well, then they start developing trust for you. They don't start getting squeamish and weird when you come around. The stuff that you talked about, where if they see an issue, they're going to be more likely to bring that to you, and all that stuff. You don't want an environment where people are afraid to talk to you. No. They're afraid to, when you come around, and then they put on a mask when you show up, not a physical mask, a figurative mask. But you don't want that. If you're okay with that, then there's some self-reflection that you need to do. And a lot of times what happens when these things come is the leader themselves. We all know that they create the issue, but consider this, Chris. There's a deeper issue there, I think. If they're doing that stuff, it's because they feel like they have to have a certain level of control. They were probably controlled the same way. And so, I really encourage senior leaders to, I do believe holding them accountable is important, from a workplace perspective, because we're talking about workplace accountability, the views on workplace accountability. The work still needs to get done, and you got to hold people accountable to the standard to get the work done. However, the way that you approach these people when they're not doing the right thing is so crucial, and it is so important. And when you're showing the leadership and the emotional intelligence to not just punish every single time something goes wrong, it changes things. And by the way, it's not huge changes that need to happen with the leadership. It's small ones.
Yeah. But you used a word there that is super important as it relates to accountability, which is standards.
Yep.
And it's up to us as leaders to set those standards, right? And there are a couple different ways that those standards need to be set. It's through your actions, right? Your actions speak louder than words. So it's the way that you're acting, the way that you're saying, you know what, this happened, but I can see how it's my fault that this happened 2 layers down in the organization because there wasn't the right training, clarity, whatever. So when people see you taking accountability in that way, you're demonstrating a standard that we have each other's backs around here, and we are all operating as a team in order to achieve certain goals. But the other way for a standard is to document it, because, and this is where, all right, I see that something happened that maybe we didn't have a process or procedure for. So my job, it wasn't in writing, so therefore I'm going to take accountability for it. Maybe you didn't understand the verbal about it. So, okay, it's on me. Now I'm going to document it. This gets into our SOP handbook or whatever. But then there could also be, visual reminders around the workplace, not necessarily about like everyone's accountable for everyone, but reminding people of standards, reminding people of core values, right? If you want accountability throughout your workplace, I'm not saying that the word accountability needs to be part of your core values, but there should be some reflection of accountability within how those core values are written, right? If one of your values is we do the right thing by our customer, we solve problems to get them the right product, whatever, that almost inherently talks about accountability because we're taking care of our customers.
Yep.
So, setting the standard is where the level of accountability really comes from.
Yeah. Know the way to show the way.
Yes.
And it's not just showing the way, but, making those corrections in the right way to get people to where not only you need them to be, but where they need them to be. Because I've always said, and it seems so cliche, but people don't just wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to go to work and do a shitty job. They just don't.
Some people do.
I mean, some people might. I'm just going to go collect my paycheck, do my 90 days, and then I can get unemployment. No.
That's right.
But for the most part, I don't believe that people are built that way. I mean, we are gregarious people, creatures rather, that really just do want to help each other out if we can. Now, usually when they don't, there's something deeper going on there that makes them not want to. It usually revolves around fear or them being unsure of themselves, which that can all be fixed too. It's just about bringing people closer. Again, work is not a family, but you can create a family-like environment there where people have that certain level of comfort to be able to talk to each other and help each other out.
Yeah.
But you brought up a lot of really, really good points. And when it comes to the overall workplace view of accountability, as senior leaders, we set that. Right. So I know we talked about this last call, so I'm not going to dive too deeply into it, but whatever we want that to be, we have to make it known and then have constant conversations around that standard. And you brought up core values. There's also, if there are processes in place, constantly reminding people that there are processes in place, and don't just hold people accountable to those processes. If somebody walks up to you and says, well, I think there might be a way we can make this better, don't just say, shut up, this is the way we've been doing it forever and we're not going to change it. Listen to them, have your little leader discussion about it afterwards. But when you listen to people and then help them get to where they need to be, that really works. But you're right. I mean, in the Army, for our core values, we had, you've seen warrior leadership. You see how I spell leadership weird. Well, that's because it's loyalty, duty, loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. They would paint them on the front of every step. They would have posters on the wall. They would do all kinds of things. And when you talk about, making constant reminders of these core values and how you want people to act and approach one another and having that professional standard, well, make it known in ways that they are constantly being reminded without having to have a conversation about it, because you're just going to be that cheesy, annoying person at the top that's constantly saying, what about your core value? What about this? What about that? And eventually they're just going to be like, oh gosh, this guy, I don't know what's going on with that dude, but he's been reading that manual for too long or something.
Well, what's funny about core values and standards and culture is that your core values or your culture is really your core values in action.
Yeah.
Right. When people understand, and you're right, visual reminders, talking about core values, super important to reinforce. But when your culture is like humming along and you're like, man, I love coming to work. I love being around the people that I'm with, our mission, we accomplish our missions, etc. Right? When that culture is right, that's because people are living the core values and they're demonstrating it. That's also one of the reasons that it's so important to hire and fire based on that core value match. I mean, when I was consulting and doing leadership development for companies, I couldn't stress that enough, because every time I can't find a single example of a time that there was a problem employee and it wasn't tied to a mismatch of core values. It's like, you know why this person's a problem? Because you've got 5 core values and they only have 2 of them. The other 3 values they're not matching with, but all the rest of your organization is. That's why this is the problem person. So get rid of them. So interviewing and hiring for that core value match helps people to assimilate into the culture, and you don't have those dips in accountability. It's like, hey, I'm looking for someone that matches these 5 kind of traits, in addition to their skills for the job. But when you don't have that, that's when you also have problems, and that flows all the way up to leadership as well.
Yeah. Well, and how often have you done a coaching gig or a consulting gig where half the time, if you're not in a senior management position, do you even know the core values of the company?
Right.
That's more common than you know. I mean, well,
Dude.
not you specifically, but audience. I mean,
Yeah.
you got to be really, really careful of that, because if you want a certain thing to be happening at work, but you're not saying it, I mean, read the book Crucial Conversations. I mean, you have to tell people. If you don't tell them, they don't know.
Yeah.
If you don't tell them, they don't know. If you don't show them, they don't understand.
You should be calling out when people are taking specific actions that reflect your core values, because that's also another point of reinforcement.
Yep.
When you get that call or email from a client who says, I just want to commend JJ because he went above and beyond. I had a small issue, and not only did he solve it, but he was pleasant. He did all the things, right? All the things that made me want to take time out of my day to either call you, send you an email, or put a review online to call that out. As soon as you, from a senior leadership standpoint, hear about that, and those kind of things should be elevated up to you, right? You're going to be calling out JJ as, hey, congratulations to this guy because he's living our core values. That's a demonstration of our core values, everybody. Let's learn from it and give him a round of applause.
And as far as accountability is concerned, you just created another form of it.
Yes.
And so there is also a subliminal way to give accountability. So when you give that praise, other people are going to be like, wow, they care enough about that where they're going to tell everybody else when somebody does the right thing. Well, they're not going to say it to their friends. They're probably going to make fun of it and say all kinds of derogatory things about it and all kinds of stuff. But in their heart of hearts, I mean, everybody, they just want to be acknowledged.
Yep.
They just want to be, what's the word? Validated. I mean, everybody wants validation. Believe it or not, you can say you don't, that's not what you need. But at the end of the day, when somebody gives you praise, you feel damn good. And that's just kind of the way we work as people. But
human nature.
It's human nature. And when you give somebody that praise, and somebody else they notice that, and it gives them that feeling of, oh my gosh, I can get that kind of praise if I do the right thing. Then now they're going to hold themselves accountable because they're going to be hoping that at some point they can also be recognized and get that sort of praise as well. But we've gone over about a minute and a half. Chris, do you have any final comments you want to make before we cut sling load here?
No, the final comment is that it's about you as the leader to demonstrate what the standards are and set the accountability standards. And you shouldn't have to be told to help people and hold people accountable if you're in any kind of supervisory or leadership role. That is just part of the job. So, we can't have the only out for me and be a successful leader. You've got to be out for everybody to be a successful leader. So take accountability seriously, because when you do, then the people who report to you and people within your organization, they see it and they start to act accordingly as well.
Completely agree. And when you look at the definition of servant leadership, it's putting the needs and the welfare of other people before your own. And so what that means is you basically want to help everybody. That's, if you want to sum it up, that's what that means. And you're not helping anybody else by not holding them accountable, by not helping them to an objective, instead of hitting them over the head with a hammer and telling them they screwed up. Well, we all do it, but that doesn't make it right. I mean, that should be the exception and not the rule. And holding them accountable means something different when you coach people along and you do it the right way, rather than just punishing every time you see something go wrong.
That's right.
But that wraps this up. Thank you for another great conversation, Chris.
Thank you.
So, not next week, but the next conversation in 2 weeks here, we're going to be talking about what happens when there's a lack of accountability. The name of the episode is going to be A Lack of Accountability. Now what? So we're going to be having that conversation. So anyone who listens to this now and between then and the next couple of weeks, please put it on your calendar. That's going to be taking place on the 1st of February. And so please join us for that, and please interact with these conversations. But whenever you do watch this, because we've had a couple people comment here and show up today, but if you really enjoy this information, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you see it on YouTube. But really the most important thing is to keep the conversation going. So put a comment below so we know what questions you have. And if there's a certain topic that you want us to discuss, please place that in the comments as well, because we'll definitely address that. We want to make these conversations meaningful to y'all. But thank you, everybody, for all of your support. And we will see you all in a couple of weeks. And Chris, we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
See you in a couple of weeks. Have a great day, everyone.